I still remember the way the air felt when I walked through that door, heavy, still, like the house itself was holding its breath. My suitcase was still in my hand, the wheels leaving faint tracks on the rug, but I froze halfway to the kitchen. There he was, sitting in the armchair by the window, his hands folded, his eyes fixed on nothing. No smile, no welcome home, Sarah. Just that silence, thick, unnatural. I tried to break it. James, is everything all right? My voice sounded too bright, too careful. He looked at me then, and it wasn't the man I'd loved for 23 years. His eyes, they were colder than winter light. He let a few seconds pass, maybe 10, maybe 20, before he spoke. And when he did, his voice was so calm it almost didn't make sense. I want a divorce. No argument, no anger, just those 4 words dropped like stones into the middle of my life. I felt my grip tighten on the suitcase handle until it hurt. My heart started pounding so loud it was all I could hear. What are you talking about? My voice cracked, but I didn't care. He shifted almost impatiently and said, Sarah, a switch flipped. I don't want to be married anymore. A switch flipped, as if 23 years together could be turned off like a light in the hallway. I wanted to scream. I wanted to beg him to take it back. But all I could do was stand there staring at the man who had been my best friend, my partner, my safe place. The man I thought I knew better than anyone. Somewhere in the background, the clock ticked, sharp, deliberate. My tea mug sat untouched on the table, a faint curl of steam rising and fading. I remember thinking how wrong it looked, just sitting there still warm while my whole life went cold. I set down the suitcase and for a moment, we just looked at each other. Or maybe I was the only one looking. He seemed already far away, like a stranger who happened to wear my husband's face. James, please, can we talk about this? My words felt small, slipping into the silence between us, but he only shook his head, his eyes sliding away again. And in that moment, I knew, whatever switch had flipped, it wasn't going back. It's strange how quickly your mind can run backwards when your present shatters. Standing there in that silent living room, my head went somewhere else entirely. To the life we had before that moment. To the nights when laughter spilled across the dinner table when the kids would roll their eyes because James and I couldn't stop teasing each other over something silly. I can still see the kitchen bathed in the soft gold of late afternoon, James leaning against the counter, sleeves rolled up, stirring a pot of pasta while I poured wine. He'd look up, grin, and say, "Taste this," holding out the spoon like it was the most important thing in the world. I'd pretend to critique it, and he'd roll his eyes, pretending to be offended before kissing me. Always quick, always warm. We weren't perfect. We argued over little things. Bills, the thermostat, his habit of leaving shoes in the hallway. But it was never serious. At least, I didn't think it was. I remember road trips, the car packed too full, our favourite playlist looping, the kids singing off-key in the back seat. James always drove, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on my knee. Sometimes when the kids fell asleep, we'd talk in low voices about our dreams, where we'd travel when it was just us again, what our life might look like in retirement. There were Sunday mornings too, quiet, slow ones. He'd make coffee, the rich smell filling the house, and we'd sit side by side at the kitchen table reading the paper. He'd slide my mug toward me exactly the way I liked it. 2 sugars, splash of cream, without asking. Little rituals that felt like proof of something unshakable. And intimacy. It wasn't just there, it was alive. Even after 2 decades, there was a spark. He'd brush against me in the hallway, pull me close in the laundry room for no reason. We didn't need grand gestures. We had the kind of closeness that made ordinary moments feel special. I trusted him completely. He handled the finances. I never doubted he'd make decisions for both of us. We made choices together. At least, that's what I believed. Looking back now, those memories feel almost too bright, like they belong to another couple entirely. But at the time, they were my truth, my reality. I thought we were solid, the kind of couple people looked at and thought, that's love, that's partnership. I didn't know then that a storm was already building somewhere beyond my horizon, that while I was busy memorizing the details of his smile, something inside him was slowly shifting, preparing to undo everything we'd built. If I'd known, maybe I would have listened harder. Maybe I would have seen the clouds forming. A switch flipped. Those were the words James chose. Simple, almost casual, as if he were talking about a light in the hallway, not the 23 years we'd spent building a life together. I keep hearing them over and over like an echo that won't fade. A switch flipped. At first, I thought maybe he meant he'd had some sudden realization, that he'd been unhappy for a while and finally found the courage to say it, but the more I replayed that moment in my mind, the more I realized he wasn't talking about courage. He was talking about something irreversible. I see it so clearly. Him in that armchair, the late afternoon light casting half his face in shadow. One side familiar, the other hidden, unreachable. His hands were folded in his lap and his voice, it was too even, too measured. What does that even mean, James? I remember asking. My voice sounded desperate to my own ears. What switch? He just shrugged, almost like it didn't matter. I can't explain it, Sarah. One day I woke up and it was different. I didn't want this anymore. And there it was. Not anger, not blame, just detachment. The kind of detachment you might feel toward a sweater you've worn for years and suddenly can't stand the sight of. I kept searching his face, looking for a crack in the mask, some flicker of the man who used to look at me like I was the center of his world. But his eyes were steady, calm, unyielding. That's when I understood. Whatever had flipped inside him had also locked something shut. It's a strange kind of pain, realizing that love can vanish like that. Not fade, not erode slowly. Just disappear, replaced by something cold and final. I thought about all the mornings we'd woken up together, the way he'd reach for me before even opening his eyes. I thought about the private jokes, the whispered plans in the dark. How could a switch erase all of that? How could it undo the way we fit together without a word? In that moment, I wasn't just hurt. I was baffled. I didn't understand how the man I knew could speak those words without flinching. Later that night, when I finally turned off the kitchen light, the sound of the switch snapping into place made me pause. The room went dark instantly. No warning, no slow dimming, just light 1 second, darkness the next. And I realized, maybe that's exactly what had happened to us. Looking back, the shadows were there long before James said the words. I just didn't want to see them. I told myself he was tired from work, that his mind was full of deadlines and meetings. But now I can replay those evenings and see the truth hiding in plain sight. He started coming home later, not by much at first, 15 minutes, half an hour, enough to notice but not enough to question. Traffic, he'd say, setting his briefcase down by the door without meeting my eyes. And I'd nod, because I wanted to believe him. Then it became hours. I'd be sitting at the dinner table, the food cooling on our plates, the kids long gone to their rooms. His chair across from me would stay empty, the soft tick of the clock filling the silence. When he finally walked in, he'd head straight for the shower, barely touching the meal I'd kept warm. His phone became another shadow between us. It was always face down on the counter or in his pocket, the screen lighting up with messages he'd answer in the other room. Sometimes I'd hear the faint chime of a notification, followed by the quiet click of the door closing behind him. And his eyes. God, his eyes told the story before his mouth ever did. They stopped holding mine. Conversations became shorter, clipped. He'd frown at little things. The way I stacked the dishes, the sound of the dryer running too long. Small irritations that once would have made him laugh now seemed to grate on him. I remember one night I reached for his hand while we were watching TV. It used to be such a natural thing, a small silent reminder that we were in this together. But he pulled away, pretending to adjust his position. I told myself not to take it personally, but something in my chest tightened. There was a distance growing between us, measured not in miles but in glances avoided, words left unsaid. It seeped into the corners of our life, like shadows at dusk, creeping in slowly until they were everywhere. Back then, I thought the shadows would pass, that we'd find our way back into the light. I didn't know they were only the beginning, the first signs that whatever switch he spoke about had already been flicked, and that I was just living in the dim glow before the darkness settled in for good. The truth didn't come to me in one clean, brutal moment. It arrived in pieces, like shards of glass catching the light at odd angles. I didn't hear it from James. Of course I didn't. But I saw enough to know. It started with a name he mentioned once or twice, Emily. Just another person in his department, he said. Nothing unusual. I remember the first time he brought her up. His tone was casual, distracted. But then her name began to appear more often, tucked into stories about late meetings and urgent projects. One afternoon, I stopped by his office to surprise him. I'd been in the area, and I thought we could grab lunch. When I walked in, he wasn't at his desk, but there was a woman's scarf draped over his chair, soft and expensive looking. A faint perfume lingered in the air. Not mine. I waited in the hallway for him, but instead of James, I heard laughter. Low, intimate. It wasn't the sound of co-workers talking about spreadsheets. It was the kind of laugh that belongs to a private world you're not meant to enter. When he finally appeared, Emily was beside him. She was younger, polished, her hand brushing his arm as they walked. His face changed the second he saw me. Not guilt exactly, but a flicker of something that made my stomach twist. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" he asked, too quickly. "I thought we could have lunch," I said, forcing a smile. Emily gave me a polite nod, then excused herself. On the drive home, my mind kept circling back to the way his eyes had darted after her when she left. That tiny glance said more than any confession could. Over the next few weeks, the signs multiplied. Late nights became the norm. He guarded his phone like it was made of gold. When he did talk about work, Emily's name was always there, woven in like an uninvited thread. I never caught them in the act, but I didn't need to. I knew the look in his eyes when he thought of her. I knew the tone of voice he used, softer, lighter, when he spoke about her compared to me. It's a strange thing realizing you're no longer the person your partner's heart turns toward at the end of the day. You feel it before you can prove it. And even when the proof comes, it's almost a relief, because at least then the shadows have a name. When I look back now, I can see it so clearly. The guilt was already there, sitting with us at the table like an uninvited guest. At the time, I didn't have a name for it. I just felt the weight. We used to fill our dinners with conversation, stories about our days, the kids, something ridiculous we'd seen online. But those evenings became quieter. James would push food around his plate, barely taking a bite. His fork scraped softly against the china, the sound stretching in the silence between us. Sometimes I'd ask, "Is everything all right?" And he'd nod without looking up. Other times, he'd give me a faint smile, the kind people use when they don't want to answer. And then he'd change the subject. The physical closeness faded too. It wasn't obvious all at once, just little things, like him leaning away when I reached for the salt, or getting up quickly after dinner instead of lingering in the kitchen with me. When I brushed against him in the hallway, he'd sidestep instead of resting a hand on my back like he used to. At night, in bed, he'd lie on his side, facing away. I'd tell myself he was tired. I'd stare at the ceiling, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, wondering if he was awake. There were times I almost reached out, almost whispered his name, but something inside me said not to. It wasn't anger I saw in his eyes when we did meet each other's gaze. It was something heavier, more complicated. Guilt has a way of hollowing a person out. His eyes had that look, as if he was both here and somewhere else entirely, carrying a secret he didn't know how to set down. Even small moments felt off. One Sunday, I made his favourite breakfast: pancakes, bacon, coffee, just the way he liked. He thanked me, sat down, and barely ate. The radio played softly in the background, and for a second I watched him, wondering if he even tasted the food. He seemed lost in another room, another life. I didn't realise then that guilt can be just as destructive as anger, maybe more so. It builds walls you can't see, walls that keep out even the smallest kindness. And once those walls go up, it doesn't matter how hard you knock. The person on the other side has already decided they're not opening the door. There's a point in every argument where you realise the other person isn't arguing at all. They're just done. With James, that point came faster than I could process. I wanted reasons, something to hold on to, some thread that could lead me back to the man I knew. But all I got was the same flat refrain. I don't want to be married. The first time he said it, I thought it was shock-talking. The second time, I thought maybe he was trying to hurt me. But by the fifth time, I understood. This was all he was going to give me. No details, no confession, just a closed door where our life used to be. I sat on the edge of the couch, my hands resting on my knees, trying to keep them from shaking. James, please. After everything we've been through, you can at least tell me why. He stood by the doorway, his posture rigid, one hand on the frame as if he couldn't wait to leave. His face was unreadable. I told you, I just don't want this anymore. That's not an answer, I said, my voice breaking. That's nothing. His jaw tightened, but he didn't look at me. Instead, he took a slow breath, like someone trying to stay calm in a room they don't want to be in. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. The door closed behind him with a solid, final sound, not slammed, but firm enough to make the air feel different. The silence after was worse than any shouting could have been. It pressed in on me, filling every corner of the room. I stared at my hands, pale against the dark fabric of my skirt, and felt the sting behind my eyes. I wanted to chase him, demand the truth, but my legs wouldn't move. It's a strange kind of cruelty, being denied even the dignity of an explanation. People talk about closure like it's a gift you get at the end of a hard chapter. But sometimes you don't get it. Sometimes the person who could give it to you chooses not to. And you're left alone, sitting in a quiet room wondering if the lack of answers will ever stop echoing louder than the truth itself. That night, I realized the story of my marriage had ended. But the ending wasn't written for me. It was written for him, and I wasn't invited to read it. For most of our marriage, I never thought twice about the money. James handled it, all of it. The bills, the savings, the investments. We both worked, but every paycheck went into the same account, and from there, he took care of the rest. It wasn't that I couldn't do it. I just trusted him. Completely. I remember sitting at the kitchen table years ago, the two of us with a stack of papers spread out between us. He'd explain something about mortgage rates or retirement accounts, and I'd nod, half listening, because I believed he had our best interests at heart. He'd tap the numbers with his pen, smile, and say, "Don't worry, Sarah, I've got this." And I believed him. Why wouldn't I? That trust felt like security back then. Now it feels like a weakness I didn't know I had. After he told me he wanted a divorce, I started looking at our finances for the first time in years. The folders, the spreadsheets, the statements. It was like opening a door to a room I'd forgotten existed. The bank account that had always felt limitless suddenly looked smaller. The investments I thought were ours. I realized I didn't even know the details. I didn't know what was in my name and what wasn't. It hit me how much I'd handed over. Not just the responsibility, but the control. One evening, I sat in front of my laptop, the glow of the screen lighting the empty kitchen. I clicked through account after account, my fingers stiff on the keys. Every number made me feel both more informed and more hollow. There was no sign of anything wrong, no missing money, no secret withdrawals. But that almost made it worse, because the betrayal I felt wasn't about what he did with the money. It was about how easily I'd given him the power to make those decisions without me. I thought about how many times I'd signed papers without reading every line, trusting that James had already done it. How many times I'd said, "You know best," and moved on to something else. Trust can be a beautiful thing when it's shared, when it's cared for. But when it's broken, it turns into something sharp, something that cuts both ways. Sitting there with the numbers in front of me, I realized I'd have to rebuild more than just my life without James. I'd have to rebuild the part of me that believed someone else should hold the keys to my future. Telling the kids was the part I dreaded most. I could take the hurt James threw at me, the cold silence, even the unanswered questions. But the thought of watching our children's faces change when they realized their family was breaking apart, that was a different kind of pain. We sat in the kitchen, the four of us. The late afternoon light slanted across the table, catching the edges of their faces. They were trying not to look at me, their eyes fixed on the wood grain of the table, on their hands, anywhere but my face. I could feel the weight of the words pressing against my chest. Your father and we've decided to separate, I began. My voice was steady, though I wasn't sure how. It doesn't have anything to do with you. We both love you. That will never change. They didn't speak at first. My son's jaw tightened. My daughter's eyes blinked rapidly, as if she was trying to keep tears from falling. The quiet in that room was almost unbearable. Only the faint drip of the faucet filled the space between us. Finally, my son asked, "Why?" Just that one word, heavy and small all at once. I glanced at James, who was sitting beside me, but he didn't look up. Sometimes people change, I said carefully. Sometimes they can't stay together, even when they've been together a long time. It was the best I could give them without laying my pain bare in front of them. They didn't need the details. They didn't need to know about switches flipping or shadows in the corners. I reached across the table, covering their hands with mine. We're still a family. It will just look different. They nodded, but their eyes told me they didn't believe that yet. And maybe I didn't either. In the weeks that followed, we tried to keep things civil in front of them. Texts about pickup times, school events, doctor appointments, quick hellos and goodbyes in the driveway. I made sure the conversations stayed polite. No raised voices, no accusations where they could hear. But kids notice things. They notice the way I no longer lean toward their father when he speaks. They notice how he keeps his distance, how we avoid each other's gaze. Keeping them out of the middle wasn't just about what we said. It was about hiding the cracks so they wouldn't feel them under their feet. I don't know if I succeeded, but I know I tried. And sometimes, that's all you can do. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day you don't expect anything from. I was at the supermarket, pushing my cart slowly down the aisle, half distracted by the list on my phone. I'd just turned the corner near the coffee and tea section when I saw her. Emily. There was no mistaking her. The same sleek hair I'd seen that day in James's office, the same tailored coat. She was standing by the shelf, scanning the boxes of herbal tea, her cart already half full. For a split second, she didn't see me. I could have turned around, walked the other way, pretended I hadn't noticed. But then her head lifted, and our eyes met. It wasn't a long look, maybe 2 seconds, maybe less. But in that brief exchange, everything was said. Surprise flickered first, then something like guilt. Or maybe that was just what I wanted to see. My heart thudded hard against my ribs, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. She glanced away almost instantly, turning her attention back to the shelf as if I'd never been there. And I did the same, pushing my cart forward, my eyes fixed on the floor tiles. But my hands were gripping the handle so tightly my knuckles ached. The sound of the cart's wheels on the linoleum felt too loud in my ears, and I caught myself holding my breath like that would make me invisible. I passed the end of the aisle and turned, but I could still feel the heat in my face, the pulse in my neck. I didn't speak to her. I didn't want to. What could I possibly say? I know who you are. I know what you've done. Or worse, why? And yet, the encounter left me rattled in a way I couldn't shake. Seeing her there, picking out tea as if she were just another woman running errands, made the whole thing feel more real. It wasn't just a shadow in the corners anymore. She had a face, a body, a place in the world outside of my imagination. When I got to the checkout, I realized I'd forgotten half the things on my list. My mind was still in that aisle, in that 2-second look that felt like it stretched forever. I drove home in silence, the groceries shifting in the back seat, and for the first time, I let myself wonder if she ever thought about me at all. I found out by accident. That's the part that still stings. Not because I was snooping, but because the truth just fell into my lap when I wasn't even looking for it. A friend called one evening, her voice carrying that mix of hesitation and urgency you can hear even before the words come. Sarah, I'm not sure if I should tell you this, but I saw James on a dating app. For a second, I didn't process it. No, you didn't, I said automatically, almost laughing, as if she'd confused him with someone else. I did, she replied quietly. His picture, his name. He even mentioned liking the same hiking trail you two used to go to. I'm sorry. After we hung up, I sat there at the kitchen table staring at my phone. My hands felt cold. I told myself not to look, that nothing good ever comes from searching for proof. But my body moved on its own, opening the app, typing his name. And there he was, James. Smiling that same smile I'd seen 1,000 times, only now it wasn't mine. His profile said he was looking for someone to share life's adventures. I almost laughed at that. Adventures. He'd already left me mid-journey. There were pictures I'd never seen before. Him at a brewery, him on a trail, him in a crisp shirt that looked freshly ironed. It felt strange seeing him through the lens of someone else's first impression, like he'd rewritten himself for a new audience. I scrolled, my thumb hesitating over the screen. Then a new photo loaded. Him with a woman I didn't recognize. She was pretty, her arm linked through his, both of them grinning at the camera. The caption said, "New beginnings." A notification pinged on my phone, startling me. I set it down quickly, my chest tight, my pulse unsteady. The sound of that tiny click as I locked the screen seemed to echo in the quiet kitchen. It wasn't Emily. That almost made it worse, as if the affair had just been a stepping stone, a bridge to somewhere else entirely. He'd moved on, found someone new, and was building a future without a backward glance. I sat there for a long time, the glow of the phone still in my eyes, and realized something I hadn't let myself say out loud. James wasn't just gone. He was already living a life where I didn't exist, and he didn't seem to miss me at all. When the call came, my heart betrayed me. It was a Tuesday evening, and I was folding laundry when the phone rang. James's name lit up the screen, and for the briefest moment something inside me lifted. A tiny flicker I thought I'd snuffed out weeks ago. "Hey," he said, his voice softer than it had been in months. "Can we meet tomorrow? I think we should talk." Those words, "we should talk," wrapped themselves around me like a fragile thread of hope. I knew better. I knew I shouldn't read into it. But I couldn't help it. All night I imagined him saying he'd made a mistake, that we could fix this, that the switch could be flipped back. The next afternoon I arrived early at the little cafe we used to go to on Sundays. I chose our old corner table, ordered 2 coffees out of habit, and sat watching the door. My pulse quickened when I saw him walk in, the familiar tilt of his shoulders, the way he scanned the room. He smiled briefly when he spotted me, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. We sat down. I waited. He pulled a folder from his bag, set it on the table, and slid it toward me. "These are the papers we need to sign for the house," he said. His tone was calm, businesslike. I stared at him, my hand frozen halfway to my coffee cup. "The house," I repeated. "Yeah," he said, flipping through the pages. "We need to figure out the division of assets so the process can move forward." The coffee in front of me cooled untouched. The low hum of the cafe pressed in on my ears. The clink of silverware, the hiss of the espresso machine, the soft laughter from the next table. All of it felt far away, like I was listening from underwater. "You made it sound like—" I stopped, the words too heavy to finish. James glanced up, met my eyes for a heartbeat, then looked back at the papers. "I didn't mean to give you the wrong idea," he said. And just like that, the fragile thread inside me snapped. I signed what needed signing, my pen scratching against the paper, my hands steady only because I refused to let him see them shake. When it was over, he thanked me, gathered the papers, and left. I stayed there a while longer, staring at the empty chair across from me, my coffee now stone cold. That little flicker of hope? I smothered it myself this time. I couldn't afford to let it catch fire again. I never realized how divorce could rearrange a whole social circle until I was standing in the middle of it, feeling the fault lines shift beneath my feet. Friends we'd known for decades, couples we'd vacationed with, people who'd celebrated birthdays and anniversaries at our table, suddenly seemed unsure where to stand. Some of them came to me right away, voices low, eyes soft with pity. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I can't believe he would do this." They'd offer hugs that lingered just a second too long, as if holding me tighter might keep me from falling apart. I appreciated the sympathy, but it came with a strange side effect. I could see the questions in their eyes, the quiet wondering about what had really happened behind closed doors. Others were different. They didn't call. Or if they did, it was brief, polite, careful. Eventually, I'd hear through someone else that they'd had dinner with James, that they didn't want to take sides, which in reality meant they already had. The worst was the night of a mutual friend's party. I walked in, and it was like someone had drawn an invisible line across the room. On one side, the people who smiled warmly, pulled me into conversation, asked how I was holding up. On the other, the ones who gave me tight, strained smiles, their eyes darting toward the door as if waiting for James to arrive. I could hear the low murmur of whispers, catch the occasional glance when they thought I wasn't looking. The air felt heavier in certain corners, conversations dying the moment I stepped close. And yet I stayed, because this was my life too. I wasn't going to vanish from it just because he'd decided to. At one point, I crossed paths with a couple we'd been close to for years. The wife hugged me. The husband offered a stiff nod. I could almost hear the unspoken words between them. "Be polite, but don't get involved." Walking home that night, I thought about how quickly lines get drawn when love falls apart. People want a version of the story they can live with, one that fits neatly into the space they've carved for you in their own lives. Some will stand beside you without hesitation. Others will quietly step away, choosing comfort over loyalty. And maybe that's just human nature. But it's also another kind of loss, one you don't expect when your marriage ends, but one you feel all the same. The nights were the hardest. Days had a way of filling themselves. Work, errands, phone calls, the mechanical rhythm of keeping life moving. But when the sun went down and the house grew quiet, there was nothing left to distract me from the hollow space James had left behind. The bed felt too big. I'd lie on my side staring at the single pillow beside me, untouched since the last night he slept here. Sometimes I'd stack extra pillows there, a poor imitation of the warmth that used to be. It didn't work. I started pulling out old photo albums, something I hadn't done in years, Sitting on the couch with a blanket around my shoulders, I'd flip through page after page. Our wedding day, the first house, vacations with the kids. There we were in matching sweaters one Christmas, grinning in front of a crooked tree. There we were in Italy, his arm around me, the sun in our eyes. I'd trace the outlines of our smiles with my fingertips, as if I could touch the people we used to be. Sometimes I'd talk to those photos, whispering questions I'd never get answers to. When did you stop loving me? Was it me or just time? Did you plan this? Or did it just happen? The clock in the living room kept its steady beat, marking the hours I couldn't sleep. Midnight, 1 a.m., 2. My thoughts ran in circles, chasing the same questions until they blurred together. I'd tell myself to get up, make tea, read a book, anything to quiet my mind. But more often than not, I'd just sit there in the dark, the photo album open on my lap, the sound of the pages turning, breaking the silence every few minutes. The house had a different voice now. Every creak in the floorboards felt louder, every gust of wind against the windows sharper. Without James's presence, without his soft breathing beside me, the nights felt endless. Like time itself had slowed down just to watch me sit with my memories. I began to wonder if the loneliness was something you could get used to, or if it simply became another layer of who you were. People told me it would get better, but alone in that quiet, with the ticking clock and the frozen smiles in my hands, better felt like a foreign country I didn't know how to reach. The what-ifs became my constant companions. They crept in during the quiet moments, brushing my teeth, folding laundry, staring into the fridge without knowing what I was looking for. What if I had noticed sooner? What if I had tried harder? What if I had been different? I'd stand in front of the bathroom mirror studying my own face, the faint lines at the corners of my eyes, the softening jawline, the hair I no longer bothered to dye every month. I'd press my fingertips against my cheeks, as if I could smooth away the years and reveal the woman James first fell in love with. Maybe if I'd been more patient when he came home late. Maybe if I'd dressed up more, laughed more, complained less. My mind spun through every moment, picking apart our life like a detective searching for the single clue that could have saved us. Rain would tap against the windows on those long afternoons, a steady rhythm that made it too easy to sink deeper into the spiral. I'd replay arguments we'd had years ago, wondering if they'd left cracks I didn't see. I'd remember the times I was too tired to go out when he asked, the vacations I said no to because I thought there would always be another chance. Some nights, I'd imagine a different version of myself, brighter, more spontaneous, less distracted by the endless responsibilities of work and family. In that version, James never looked elsewhere. The switch never flipped. But the dangerous thing about what-ifs is that they pretend to offer answers. They don't. They just keep you circling the same empty space, blaming yourself for a story someone else decided to rewrite. One evening, I caught my reflection in the darkened window as I was washing dishes. I looked tired, but there was something else in my eyes. A quiet anger at the way I'd been twisting myself into knots, searching for reasons that might not even exist. I set the dish down, dried my hands, and whispered to my reflection, "You didn't do this alone." The words felt shaky, but they were the truest ones I'd said to myself in months. The rain kept falling, the house stayed quiet, and the questions didn't disappear. But for the first time, I felt a flicker of defiance against the spiral, as if maybe I could step out of it, even if just for a little while. It didn't happen in a single moment of rage. It was quieter than that, steadier. I woke up one morning and knew I couldn't keep letting James into my emotional space. Not through unexpected phone calls, not through small talk that left me aching afterward. The decision felt like a line drawn in chalk at first, fragile, easy to smudge. But I made it anyway. From now on, I told myself, the only conversations we'd have would be about the kids, logistics, schedules, No more lingering on the phone, no more letting him see the hurt in my voice. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from him. Nothing urgent, just a casual comment about the weather and how it reminded him of a trip we'd once taken. A month ago, I might have answered, let it pull me into nostalgia, maybe even into one of those strange half-conversations that felt like we were almost still us. Instead, I typed one word. Okay. Then I set the phone down and locked the screen. The sound of that click was oddly satisfying, like shutting a door you'd been meaning to close for a long time. It wasn't easy. There were moments I'd see his name pop up and my heart would still stutter, that old reflex kicking in before my mind caught up. I'd have to remind myself, this isn't a friend checking in. This isn't someone who holds you anymore. This is the father of your children, and that's all. I started imagining the line in my mind whenever we interacted, a clean, solid boundary. On my side was my sanity, my healing, my quiet. On his side was whatever life he'd chosen. One evening, he came by to pick up the kids. We stood in the entryway, the space between us thick with unspoken things. He tried to make small talk, something about a new restaurant in town, and I just smiled politely, nodded and said, "The kids are ready." His eyes searched mine for something, maybe the old warmth, maybe permission to cross the line. I didn't give it. When the door closed behind him, I leaned against it for a moment, breathing in the silence. It didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like mine. Drawing the line wasn't about punishing him. It was about reclaiming the space in my life that I'd let him keep walking through long after he'd left. And with every okay, every locked screen, every closed door, that space was starting to feel like home again. It started with the couch. One Saturday morning, I woke up with this restless energy, the kind that makes you want to change something. Anything. I looked at the living room and thought, why not? I pushed the couch to the opposite wall, angled the armchair toward the window, moved the rug so it caught the morning light just right. By the time I was done, I was sweaty, a little out of breath, and oddly proud. It wasn't just furniture. It was the first time in years I'd made a change in this house without asking anyone else's opinion. No. Do you think it'll look better this way? No. Will that block the view of the TV? Just me, deciding what I liked. From there, it became a kind of quiet game, finding small ways to make the space my own. I bought candles in scents James never liked, warm vanilla, smoky cedar. I lit them in the evenings, letting the flicker of their flames turn the room into something softer, more mine. Cooking changed too. I stopped making the dinners I'd cooked for him out of habit. One night I roasted vegetables and tossed them with pasta, no meat, just because that's what I wanted. Another night I baked salmon with enough lemon to make my mouth water, knowing I wouldn't hear him complain that it was too sour. I poured myself a glass of wine and ate at the table with a book open beside me, soft music playing in the background. And then there were the walks. At first, I told myself it was for the exercise, but it became more than that. I'd wander through the neighborhood as the sun was setting, noticing things I'd never really paid attention to before. The way the light turned the houses gold, the smell of someone's fireplace in the cool air, the sound of leaves crunching under my shoes. Each of these moments was small. Alone, they might not seem like much, but together they began to stitch something new inside me. A sense of ownership over my own days. I still had the empty spaces, the quiet nights that felt too long. But in between, I had these pockets of peace, these tiny freedoms that reminded me life could feel good again, even in ways I never expected. And every time I rearranged something, lit a candle, or took a walk just for me, it felt like I was slowly, gently, moving myself back into the center of my own life. I was coming out of the grocery store juggling a bag of apples and a carton of milk when I heard someone call my name. Sarah? The voice was warm, familiar in a way that pulled me back years in an instant. I turned and saw Daniel, an old friend from college I hadn't spoken to in ages. He looked almost the same, just a little more silver in his hair, a few more lines at the corners of his eyes. We stood there for a moment, grinning like two people who'd just stumbled into a forgotten chapter of their lives. We talked right there on the sidewalk, the groceries in my arms slowly getting heavier. He told me he'd moved back to town a few months ago, that he'd been meaning to look me up but never got around to it. I didn't tell him that timing had been a strange, fragile thing for me lately, but I felt the coincidence settle warmly in my chest. Before we parted, he said, "Hey, there's an art exhibit opening downtown this Friday. Why don't you come with me? We can catch up." I almost said no out of habit, the same reflex that had kept me home so many nights, telling myself I wasn't ready. But something in me shifted. "All right," I said. "That sounds nice." Friday came and I walked into the gallery with Daniel at my side. The place was alive with soft music and the low hum of voices. Paintings lined the walls, each one a burst of colour and story. We wandered slowly, stopping to talk about which pieces we liked best, which ones we didn't understand at all. He handed me a glass of wine, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at ease. There was a moment when I caught myself laughing, really laughing, at something he said about a sculpture. It startled me, how natural it felt, like I hadn't been holding my breath for months. The evening wasn't a romance. It didn't need to be. It was proof that my life was still moving, that there were still unexpected moments waiting for me out in the world. When we said goodbye, he hugged me and said, "Don't be a stranger this time." And as I walked to my car, the city lights reflecting in the gallery windows behind me, I thought, maybe I won't be. It took me a long time to realize that wanting love again didn't mean wanting marriage again. For months, the two had been tangled together in my mind, as if one couldn't exist without the other. But somewhere between the quiet evenings, the walks alone, and the unexpected conversations with old friends, the knot started to loosen. One afternoon, I was walking through the park, the kind of early spring day when the air is cool but the sun is warm enough to touch your skin. The trees were just starting to bud, little bursts of green breaking through the grey. I watched couples strolling by, some holding hands, some walking side by side in easy silence. For the first time, I didn't feel that sharp ache in my chest. Instead, I felt curious. Curious about what it might be like to love again without the weight of contracts, mortgages, and the word forever looming like a verdict. Marriage had once felt like the safest place in the world to me, a promise you could build a whole life on. But now I understood that safety wasn't in the paperwork, or even in the ceremony. Safety was in trust, in choosing each other every day without needing a legal stamp to prove it. I imagined meeting someone new and telling them, "I'm not looking to be a wife again, but I can be a partner. I can be a friend, a lover, a confidant. I can share my life without signing it over." The thought didn't feel bitter, it felt freeing. That afternoon I sat on a park bench, listening to the birds and watching the light shift through the branches. A couple walked past, laughing about something I couldn't hear, and I found myself smiling. Not because I wanted to be them, but because I believed, for the first time in a long time, that I could have something just as warm in my own way. Marriage had been the shape of love I knew for most of my life. Now I wanted love that could move and change, love that didn't need to fit into a frame. When I stood up to leave, the wind caught my hair, and I tucked it behind my ear. I realized I was walking lighter, as if I'd finally set something down. Love was still out there, but this time I'd meet it on my own terms. There's a certain quiet that comes after the storm. Not the uneasy silence you get in the middle of it, but the kind that settles when the wind has finally died down. That's where I find myself now. The wreckage is still there, The pieces of the life I used to know scattered in ways I can't put back together. But the air is clear. I can breathe again. For a long time, I thought I needed answers to move forward. I thought closure was something James had to give me, like a key to unlock the door I'd been trapped behind. But the truth is, he doesn't hold that key. He never did. The lock was mine all along. I've learned that some things don't get explained, some love stories don't get neat endings, and some switches, once they've been flipped, will never click back to where they were. I think about that night in the kitchen the first time he said it. A switch flipped. Back then, the words felt like the end of everything. Now they feel different. Not softer exactly, but less like a sentence and more like a statement of fact. A switch flipped in him, and eventually one flipped in me too. It didn't happen all at once. It was in the quiet decisions, moving the couch, taking walks alone, saying no to conversations that left me raw. It was in the moments I chose myself over the past, even when the past felt safer. Tonight, as the sun dips low and the sky turns that deep, forgiving shade of gold, I stand at my window and watch the light fade. The house feels different now. Not emptier, just mine. I walk over to the lamp in the corner, the one I moved next to my favourite chair, and I flip the switch. The light blooms instantly, warm and steady, filling the room in a way that makes the shadows retreat. Some switches flip forever. You can't force them back, no matter how tightly you hold the memory of what they once lit up. But there's another kind of switch, the one you turn on yourself, the one that doesn't depend on anyone else to keep it glowing. And maybe that's the real secret to surviving all of this. Not waiting for someone else to bring the light back, but learning how to find it, how to make it, how to keep it burning. On your own. What part of this story touched you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read them. If this story felt close to your heart, give it a like, subscribe if you want to be part of a space where real stories matter. Got a couple more minutes? Check out the next story. It's also about the things we rarely say out loud.